So here we are, French cinema. I'm such a French film nerd. This is a funny movie, Le Valseuse. Les Grands Bleus is just a beautiful film. I remember watching this film when it first came out and thinking, this guy's the best director in the world, Jesus. I grew up in video stores like this, you know. One thing is to go to the Cinematheque and watch things on the big screen, we love that. But to be honest, I mean, I learned equally a lot being with my friends and arguing about movies, waiting, like what are we going to see tonight, you know? Is it going to be this or this, you know? And I miss this experience of being around physical objects like this a lot. So here we are, Scandinavian, and I have my own shelf. My goodness. I've never been so proud. I'm a grown-up. I made it. I have a shelf in a French video store. That's wonderful. Anything by Antonioni is interesting. When you train for mise en scène, when you're a young director, you know, you got to look at this stuff. La Notte is actually a film that reminds me a little bit of Bergman. It's a kind of a couple story. And I just did my new film, The Worst Person in the World, Julie à 12 chapitres, which is a story of love. And parts of the film is about the failure of love. So, I mean, I think like La Notte is a good kind of sad love story to have a look at. Let's go down here and then we come back up. Should we do that? So you can have some, yeah. Okay, so here's something really interesting. New York Stories. Woody Allen, Coppola and Martin Scorsese makes a short film each about their city, New York, you know. And I just made kind of the third part of my Oslo trilogy. And in a way, I try to be specific and convey the city I grew up in, and I think like these filmmakers have been really extraordinary. I like the idea of filmmakers portraying their cities, you know, and we have no, yes, exactly, like you have Sidney Lumet. You know, Dog Day Afternoon, Serpico, you get a sense of a subjective portrait of a city, which is what I'm interested in.
Yeah, it's almost a character.
Exactly, like the city becomes a character and you see the city develop through Lumet's work.
I felt so safe with you, so loving.
Through the work of Martin Scorsese as well, you see it in Spike Lee. You know, his Brooklyn is a very specific Brooklyn. Then he makes other parts of New York his kind of world as well. I think that's really, there's something you can do in film where you sculpt something out of the city. People often ask me, so sociologically, like how is Oslo developing or architecturally? And I can't answer. I can only be a human being with a point of view, and I can show you. Come with me, I'll show you Oslo. That's my role as a filmmaker, you know? The light in Scandinavia, particularly in Oslo, because it's such a northern country, you get this amazing transitional light. In the summer, there's almost no darkness at night, and you get these long nights with low light, and I think that's very specific for the Oslo feeling that I try to portray. I also, we're looking at American stuff, I think this is George Cukor's classic romantic comedy. It's the best cast film ever because, you know, Katharine Hepburn has to make a choice, the impossible choice between Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart. And throughout the film, it doesn't become so much about finding the right man. It becomes about who is she.
I used to be afraid of that look. The withering glance of the goddess.
I didn't think that alcohol would do... Oh, shut up.
I think, in a way, my new film, Julie à 12 chapitres, we're playing around with the kind of the concept of romantic comedy. So I think I gotta, you know, tip my hat to the masters. In a way, no one should say there has been made an ultimate romantic comedy. It's like the eternal theme. But I would say, if an alien landed on Earth and, you know, asked me, hey, show me a romantic comedy, I would say the Philadelphia Story is a good place to start. I mean, to be quite honest, I mean, I could talk about Anchorman probably for a long time because Will Ferrell is like the funniest man alive at the moment, I think. If you think about the cultural impact of Saturday Night Live from, you know, the early days of Chevy Chase and Bill Murray.
It just doesn't matter! It just doesn't matter! It just doesn't matter! It just doesn't matter!
All the films they did, and also with John Landis and, you know, that whole group of people out of Saturday Night Live. And then every generation there's been something new. Eddie Murphy, growing up on that stuff. Like American comedy to me is like...
Hot.
Lorne Michaels is like, what a genius, you know. As a director, I'm really interested in casting and finding people. And if you look at the cast of Saturday Night Live throughout the years, I mean, who is this Lorne Michaels? What does he have for breakfast? How does he find these people? I mean, everyone auditions for it, but the people he picks are like the golden standard of modern comedy. So, yeah, no, I just wanted to mention it because I keep talking about very serious directors, but I think that making good comedy is the hardest thing in the world. So here we are, French cinema. I'm such a French film nerd, it's embarrassing. So I got to find someone I find really interesting at the moment, Mia Hansen-Løve. What a great director she is. Human stories. She always makes films about big themes, but about the small events of life. This film, Eden, it had me and all my old DJ friends crying in the cinema in Norway. This is a beautiful film. And you know the interesting thing about Eden, it's about a DJ. And it's loosely based on her brother, who has been a DJ. But it's a coming-of-age film about time and existence. And after you're done with it, you feel that you've lived a part of someone's life. And it's a very moving story. It's about a DJ who is kind of the best friend of Daft Punk, and they take off and everyone around him becomes famous, but he just keeps doing the small jobs and doesn't really have that great career. And it's a very moving story of someone who doesn't know how to become an adult and take responsibility for one's life. And I think in many ways, many of my films are about that as well. The feeling of being grown up, but looking around and thinking, I'm still not a grown up. Like, how are these people figuring out life and why am I so lost? And all those things that I think a lot of people I know go through in reality. I think this film is a great portrait of that process of becoming a human that takes responsibility for yourself. I feel like Mia Hansen-Løve is my French sister. I really feel at home in her films. Yeah, I mean, to honestly, one of the greatest films and most radical films in the development of cinema language is Hiroshima Mon Amour by Alain Resnais. Hiroshima. It's a film that I've watched since I was in my teens, and I watch it regularly. And the older I get, I don't feel that it gets weaker the more I know about cinema, or the more I know about humans, or the more I know about politics and history. It gets better and better and better. It's written by Marguerite Duras, a fantastic writer who I also read a lot of books by. I'm very fond of her, where the montage idea is not only used to represent allegory or polemics, it's actually made to draw you into a very complex internal human experience. I think the internalization of this type of language is the great breakthrough of Alain Resnais. It's a film that puzzles me. It could not be told without the specific form in which it is told. The mise en scène, the editing, creates a special structure of thought and emotion, which it could not have been a book. It could only be this film. It's very specific to cinema history, and I keep going back to it. It's a film that humbles me. French cinema is so fundamental to the development of the language we all try to speak with making movies. So I can't. It's almost an impossible question to answer. I don't think if you really like movies, you can't say you're not interested in French cinema, because it's such a big part of the landscape of where we come from. But I think it's important, like some French filmmakers are very serious and other people have also a sense of humor. And I think a character that I love, one of my favorite characters in movies is the main character in La Rayon Vert.
Tu regardes des mecs, toi? Bien sûr que tu regardes des mecs. Écoute, je suis toute seule en vacances.
She is unbearably self-centered. She's terrible, yet I love her. I mean, it's that complexity. She suddenly discovers there is summer holiday. All her friends left Paris. They have a place to go. And suddenly she realized she didn't make any plans. Maybe because she's someone that walks around and talks, and you know, she's very much in her head. and she feels suddenly, slowly through that summer how lonely she is. And it's a film about desperate longing for love and companionship. And I think it's such a, and it's you got to laugh and cry with this one. You know, it's full of emotion, and Éric Rohmer seemed to just keep working and doing, like no subject is too small to start with. But then his films usually grow into quite thematically rich films, you know. So Éric Rohmer, always an inspiration, always an inspiration. Speaking of the development of romantic comedies from Cukor and up until Notting Hill, which is a wonderful film, you know, or a lot of Woody Allen's work is very important. I also see Éric Rohmer is one step in that progression of portraying the modern way of looking at the complexity of love and relationships. Several of his films deal with this somehow, and I think in terms of cinema, I'm interested more in behavior than I am in judging my characters morally. And I think Éric Rohmer doesn't judge people. He's like really curious, like, why are people so fucked up? You know, like, this is such a cool film. This is like one, you know, the gangster film is remarkable. If you look at the history of it, it's one of the genres that really deal with existential questions of negotiating also family and connectedness, the sense of power and transactionalism in relationships. And I think that Jacques Audiard did this film, which is kind of a version of the gangster movie, and it's a coming-of-age tale, and it's a story of becoming someone from being nothing.
Tu cherches quoi là? Ça, pourquoi un putain d'arabe travaille pour les corps? Tu fais la danseuse, hein?
I remember watching this film when it first came out and thinking, this guy's the best director in the world, Jesus. His sense of freedom and spontaneity of movement of camera, but then also hitting very specific frames, being very clear about point of view, and then suddenly being kind of messy again. Like his dynamic of mise en scène is remarkable. I remember watching this when I first lived in London at the ICA or something, like a small cinema. And
arrête de bouffer! Tu me regardes et paf, je suis dans mon front.
yeah, there's just something about his cinema that, and this one is so funny. People forget that he made this incredibly entertaining, smart, incredible good script. You know, he's also a great director, but he's a screenwriter as well.
Mademoiselle, vous faites mal votre travail.
Pardon?
Oh, je disais que vous faisiez mal votre travail, mademoiselle.
It's very funny. I mean, there's so much we could talk about. The funny thing, when I grew up, I had like this poster over my bed. I fell in love with it when I was a child. And I love the cinematography and the scope, and there's a sense of childishness, and I mean that positively, like in Steven Spielberg, like in E.T. There's this naivete of the gaze of the director who just goes into the world and finds beauty and fascination and big emotions, and you know, that's cinema too. We can talk about the sophistication of things, but we can also talk about the simplicity of the gaze and the beauty and embracing the grand emotions. And Les Grands Bleus is just a beautiful film. This is a funny movie, Les Valseuses. You know this film? Bertrand Blier. I wonder, I haven't seen it for many, many years, but I remember watching it with a group of friends when I was very young and having the biggest debate. Is this acceptable? Is it not acceptable? Isabelle Huppert, I think, plays a very young role in this one. And I remember I was probably, when I saw this film, so again, I haven't seen it for many years, but I remember just laughing at the silliness of these men and their approach to sexuality. But I also remember we were many people watching it, and some people got really upset about it. I wonder how this plays in today. I'm curious. This is the history of cinema, you know? People are trying to do something, explore something, and then times change. So I'm curious. I should see this again and see how I feel about it now.
Des types comme toi, j'en ai plein les pattes, là. En ce moment, tu peux pas savoir, les accroches, je sais pas, c'est pas croyable. Hein? C'est une correction que tu es venu chercher ici? Non, 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 non. Seulement un froc.
I think that's great. I guess we should, I mean, I could keep talking about French movies, but I think we should venture to other continents as well. Powell and Pressburger, The Red Shoes. What's interesting is that we are brought up to think that cinema has these kind of clusters of themes, like New British Cinema, French New Wave, Cinéma de look, like they cluster directors together. A lot of the time, some filmmakers don't they don't belong, they're unique, you know, they don't belong to a wave or anything. And I think Powell and Pressburger comes out of Great Britain at a time where British cinema is quite different, and they created films that deal with imagination and fantasy and color and movement. And I feel like a lot of people who are making films are either choosing to do genre, and then you can be more sort of fantastical, or you have to be a realist and make serious movies. There's a strange divide going on. I think this hits straight in the middle. Scenes from a Marriage is very interesting. I understand they made a TV show now. I haven't seen it yet, but when this film came out in Scandinavia in the 70s, it created a wave of divorces because of its honest portrayal of the complexity of married life, you know. I think this is, the interesting thing about Bergman is there seems to be, it's a matter of proximity. Like he wants to go close. He wants to go ruthlessly close to people. And that's the sort of a revelatory experience of discovering Bergman when, quite late in my life, when I was in my 20s, I started looking at Bergman and realized that he was the one director that felt, strangely enough, almost the most truthful in showing the darker sides of human interactions. But still, there is hope and compassion in him as well. You know, he varied. He made a lot of different types of films. If you look at Wild Strawberries, it's a very beautiful and endearing film that deals with existential regret, but it also shows the compassion between people. You know, it's very interesting in Scandinavia. Like when you talk about Scandinavian cinema, very often Bergman comes up, but in this kind of slightly in the shadow of Bergman, there's been other filmmakers, and one of them is Jan Troell. It's a kind of a double feature: the New Land and The Immigrants, two films that belong together with Max von Sydow and Liv Ullmann. It's like really, really great cinema. It's a journey of immigrants from Sweden to America, and it's a story of how America became, in a way. It's a grand epic tale. Jan Troell is my father did sound on one of Jan Troell's films called Flight of the Eagle. So as a child, I was on set with many different filmmakers. And I remember Jan Troell being very, very kind to me. I was probably 6 or 7, and I remember him like sitting down with me and talking to me, and he had this like extreme warmth that he shared with the team. That's like my ideal of a director. It's someone that can create that companionship and warmth and that big group dynamic. And you see it in his movies. He loves people, like really, and you sense it in all his films. So Jan Troell is someone to really have a look at if you haven't discovered him already. This is my grandfather's film, La Chasse. In the 50s, in the small country of Norway, he made this film kind of thinking he would try to do a jazz film. It's very improvisational, it's very inspired by Nouveau Roman. You know, he was reading Alain Resnais. He wanted to do something experimental, and he made La Chasse, which went to Cannes in 1960. And when he came to France, suddenly there were other people. He didn't know about Nouvelle Vague, so they said, "Oh, you made a Nouvelle Vague film," and he was very proud. So this has become kind of a Norwegian classic, and it's really nice that it's out in France. So, Jakten, La Chasse by my grandfather, Éric Rohmer. During the silent era, Denmark was one of the biggest producers of cinema in the world. I think in 1912, it was one of the biggest exporters of movies to America, Europe, and Russia. They even made different versions. During the silent era, they would do a tragic ending of a film for the Russian market, and they would make a happy ending for the American market. And they would export their films. But generally, also, you just had a lot of production. You have the Nordic Film, which is the oldest still functioning film studio in the world. So Danish cinema has just had, for some reason that I can't explain, a great story of sustaining its cinematic output. And they've also managed to have a mixture between the artistic ambitious and the kind of popular mainstream iterations of movies. You know, they've had an industry that's done both, and I think that's very healthy. But speaking of like my heroes of cinema, Andrei Tarkovsky. He made 7 films and they're all masterpieces. I'm sorry. It's a rare occasion that people make only interesting and good films, and this is the case of Tarkovsky. The sense of texture, light, the cinematography becoming something more than just cinematography, becoming a poetic observation of the world. The Mirror is a film that you can see time and time again, and you never quite understand it fully. I think a lot of filmmakers, when you talk to them, you get drunk at night with filmmakers and you talk, like very often Tarkovsky comes up as someone, oh, Jesus, Tarkovsky, how did he do it? There's this mystery of this amazing Russian filmmaker. So, yeah, I never felt I cracked it, why he's so wonderful. You just have to see it. So there's a big experience of going into a Tarkovsky cinema. I think I've kind of gone for a spectrum of things. Yes. We've done Ron Burgundy and Tarkovsky. Then we know we have a good spectrum. No, this was fun. This was really great. Thanks for having me.